working together across the industry is really important. It's great to see all voices being represented, the laws being tested, legislation being requested across the world. We want to be able to come to a conclusion where, at least when you go into a particular jurisdiction, you can build that into your budget. I am the Chief Legal Officer and Interim Chief Operating Officer of Parity Technologies, which is the leading contributor from a technical perspective to Polkadot. I actually have worked for 4 great British names: Linklaters, Barclays, Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, and now Dr. Gavin Wood. And the golden thread throughout all those jobs is that I was always looking for the frontier of law and regulation. So I left my job at Linklaters, where I was an equity and debt markets lawyer, to join compliance at Barclays. And that was pre-financial crisis. And so compliance was just a fledgling department within all these different organizations, because in 2006, Enron and Sarbanes-Oxley was happening in the States. And so compliance was starting to become big. And then, of course, the financial crisis hit, which nobody would have wanted to see, but it happened. And then compliance became a much bigger thing. And I was on the forefront of that. And then when Mr. Blair left office, no other former UK Prime Minister had gone into the charitable world or the consulting world as he had. So again, navigating new law and regulation. And then after almost a decade with Mr. Blair, it was time for my next adventure. And I heard about this little thing called Web3, where no laws and regulations were really even written. And I actually had a friend say, I've met some amazing people from this place called Parity, and they're working on something called Polkadot. And this was 2021. And he was like, you really should go meet these people, because I think you'd really be interested in what they're doing, and it's really up your alley. And that was the start of the conversation, really, at the end of 2021. And I joined in January 2022. The learning curve was very short, but it was very steep. And part of the reason why it was so steep is just the number of acronyms, right, that people were using in this new tech world. I mean, I had heard of blockchain before because Mr. Blair actually was looking at technology for development in developing countries and had written a paper on the use of blockchain in governance. So I had a little bit of an intro, but I really got into the deep tech side when I joined Parity. And, you know, I consider the engineers who I work with to be artists. And their medium is code. It's not bronze, it's not clay, it's not oil on canvas, but instead it's programming languages. And so learning new acronyms in an area where there wasn't really law and regulation available, while dealing with people who are artists and trying to understand what they do, was quite first 6 months. You know, they always say talk about your first 90 days. And I was like, I was just trying to orient myself in this new world my first 90 days, much less, you know, try to put in place legal plans. I actually started off life as an equity and debt markets lawyer. So I was very educated about the US securities laws. And I was looking at how digital assets, tokens, were being viewed by different regulators and all the questions that they were being asked, and thought, well, these could be commodities or they could be securities, but it's likely that they're going to go more in the security realm. And so when I heard that the Linklater strategy and the Web3 strategy had been to abide by those US securities laws, it was something that was innately familiar to me because I had been doing it first at Linklaters for almost 5 years and then also at Barclays for 7 years. And so I thought, okay, well, I might not be able to understand the technology straight off, but I will be able to understand those underlying principles. So it gave me a lot of confidence that in this brave new world that there would be a really solid regulatory strategy and plan put in place with Linklaters and also, for instance, Angela Dalton, who was a regulatory advisor to Web3 at that time, but also engage with the SEC and other regulators around the world. So I thought, if I'm going to join this new world, this is where I want to be. There was a lot of foresight by those who put in place that strategy at Web3 and with Linklaters and with Signum growth. And that strategy was to engage with regulators around the world, to educate those regulators about what digital assets are. And it's not just an investment instrument, especially DOT. It's a utility token. So you use it to secure the network, you use it for voting, and people are rewarded for securing the network, via staking. And I think that education process, along with following the U.S. securities laws, meant that the ultimate goal was to get a no-action letter that was agreed by the SEC, much like what happened with Bitcoin and also Ethereum in the U.S. And then also to see that the network was so decentralized that the DOT token would morph from a security into software. As software, it wouldn't be regulated in the same way as securities. And then potentially it would be looked at and fall under the umbrella of other regulators around the world. The way a no-action letter works in the U.S., and again, we're being very U.S.-centric here because obviously there was engagement in the EU and there was engagement in Japan, there was engagement all over the world. But the U.S. is a important jurisdiction for a number of reasons. Now, actually, in reality, the no-action letter is written by your law firm that represents you, saying, we don't think the SEC will take any action because they, this reason, and that reason. But it, of course, has to be blessed by the regulators who are involved. So there were over 50 meetings over the course of 5 years that were done in person with the SEC. And those meetings involved the Web3 Foundation and also Linklaters and Signum, trying to be on the path to agree this no-action letter with the SEC. And then, of course, we had a shift in approach, which was led by Gary Gensler and involved a number of enforcement actions being levied against the industry, really. And a lot of this was driven by what happened with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. And unfortunately, I think that has colored the entire industry. And I would just quote the U.S. prosecutor on that case, who actually, when he was speaking to the jury, said, listen, I know there's been a lot made of this technology, but the technology might be new. The actors might be new, but what we're talking about is as old as time. And that is lying, cheating, and stealing, and greed, which are fundamental human characteristics and have nothing to do with the technology. So he was saying that, I think, to make it relatable, dealing with a really tech-heavy area. But it's true more generally, and unfortunately, I think we've all been painted with the same brush. In the U.S., but other countries, other jurisdictions, for instance, like the EU, has put in place MiCA, which provides regulatory certainty. India has regulatory certainty, for instance, on the tax side. We've got Singapore and Hong Kong and the UAE, particularly like Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They're creating different regulatory regimes and sandboxes to actually attract the industry, whereas the U.S. is at the opposite end of the spectrum, where uncertainty reigns, and I think it will reign until 2025 at least. So the Web3 Foundation put out a statement, because of course the Web3 Foundation is the issuer of the native token DOT, and they led all the regulatory discussions and initiatives. Their CLO, Daniel Schoenberger, actually went and testified in front of Congress to say it's so decentralized that this is why we don't think DOT is a security. It's actually software. Now, there has been no action letter agreed since then, but all other altcoins, there are about 70 of them, have been listed as securities by the SEC in these variety of enforcement actions. And in not one of those enforcement actions has DOT been named as a security by the SEC. I think that as a result of the 5 years and over 50 meetings of direct engagement to create that trust, to show that commitment, to show that you are concerned about others around you. And the technology really is there to improve life. We're not just cowboys looking to incite some sort of rebellion or revolution. It's more an evolution of what is existing because of innovative minds and creative people who are able to view the world and where we're going in a different way. The only way to bring certainty to the industry really is legislation, in my opinion. And it's not within the purview right now of the regulatory agencies to bring that certainty. And that's why it's great to see MiCA and other legislation coming into effect, because it is providing certainty. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve, actually building relationships and trust with the people who govern. I mean, I personally think it's a matter of national security. If you lose your technological edge, or if you willingly allow others to become more attractive to these wonderful minds who are building these amazing things, who are building the future, then to me, I think that's a fundamental issue. It would be very short-sighted to allow all that talent, to allow all those innovations to go elsewhere. A lot of what those in the Web3 industry think, not just Polkadot, focus on decentralization. So that means that there is not one individual or one entity within the ecosystem that has the final say on any major decisions. And that, again, takes shape in a variety of ways. So the pseudo key was, for instance, provided to the community back a few years ago. So that's an important point from a technical perspective. You had the governance one that was set up and just replaced in June of last year by OpenGov. So it's not one point that determines decentralization. There's actually a number of matrices that have been put out by a variety of law firms that go through at least 6 different categories that are looked at in terms of a protocol's decentralization. And within each of those 5 to 6 categories, there is up to 10 to 20 questions to say, who makes the technical changes and how are those made? Who makes the financial decisions and how are those made? Who is actually making the legal and regulatory decisions? How are people interacting on a day-to-day basis? So it really is that concept and that commitment that it's not housed in one corporation, not housed in one person, and that it really is something that the whole community has a say in, that's absolutely essential. So Polkadot is the world's largest DAO, and that is independently verifiable. There's over 500 projects within the Polkadot ecosystem. And each one of those projects, and also each DOT token holder, can have a say through OpenGov, through voting, on how those treasury funds are used. From my point of view, as a political science major and also a lawyer, you see how people's human dynamics play out, how the governing dynamics play out on a day-to-day basis. And these things have been happening since humans actually started to interact together, actually are playing out almost on fast forward within OpenGov. And because there is a treasury there, because we are talking about a lot of money actually that can be voted on to be allocated to particular projects, the stakes are very high. And right now, we are in a very lucky position that within Polkadot, the Treasury is not the only source of funding for projects, but it is a very, very important source. And you also do have the Web3 Foundation. You also do have Parity, for instance, and you have individuals who are called whales, as everyone knows, who hold a lot of DOT. You have the Decentralized Futures Funding Program from the Web3 Foundation. So there's many different sources of funding that are available, but I think certainly the intention is that the Treasury would be that main source of funding. and the collectives within this community, which kind of naturally build up around areas of expertise. So for instance, the fellowship, they're the engineers. They're voting on the technical changes. Because of course, me as a lawyer, I would always defer to the engineers in terms of what bugs need to be fixed, what upgrades need to be put in place, and the timing of that. So I think you naturally see these collectives forming who will focus on particular issues in order, with their expertise, to make sure that any funds are spent properly. And then you also, which I think is something that is, we should be very, very proud of, and actually other protocols and regulators are pointing to, we have the transparency report that was recently published. Alice and Bob put that together. And we got a lot of flack for that at first, because people are like, oh my gosh, how much are you spending on coals? And how much are you spending here? How much are you spending on marketing? But my view is that is fabulous. It's fantastic. We don't have to be transparent like that. There is nothing in articles of association, because there aren't any. There's nothing in governing documents that or regulatory requirements that make us be that transparent. And it's only out of our own sense of responsibility, of trustworthiness, of holding our community accountable as this DAO, as this community governing together, that report was published. And sure, there were some things in there that we didn't want to hear, that we didn't want to see, that we want to fix. But we have the ability to fix them. And that is, I think, a hugely important and responsible thing to talk about and to be proud of. And again, you see other protocols now. I believe it was Cosmos just a couple weeks ago were saying, have you seen this report? Why aren't we doing this? We also had a number of regulators reach out to say, thank you, this is what we want to see from other protocols. So right now with DAOs, it is a community of people who have decided that they want to achieve a certain goal. But it's not one person, and it's not a traditional company. It's a kind of a new form of legal entity. The Polkadot community voted to create something called the Polkadot Community Foundation. And that is an entity that wraps around the community of token holders to provide legal certainty. Because many in the traditional world are not comfortable with the concept of a DAO, they actually want an entity that by law is recognized, with an address, with articles, with directors who they can send invoices to, because they actually need to put their tax number on those invoices, and they need to show that an individual is accountable should anything go wrong. But the DAO didn't have that, because the DAO is just a collection of people who come together without a legal identity, without an address, without a tax number. So this entity that has been set up, the Polkadot Community Foundation, will serve as that legal entity that third parties can interact with in order to do business, whether it's to rent a convention center or to provide protection for trademarks, for instance, or to review how the money within the Polkadot treasury is being spent. I think an important point to note about the Polkadot Community Foundation is that the community decided to set that up, and a separate consultancy was engaged in order to structure that entity, to pick the jurisdiction that it recommended for that entity to be set up in. And then via the OpenGov process, the Polkadot community voted to say, yes, this is the structure we want. Yes, this is the jurisdiction we want. Yes, this is the people who we want to be involved in. Before the advent of the Polkadot Community Foundation, you would have to go to one of the existing corporations or people within that community and contract directly with them. You'd have to put your credit card down. Me as an individual, I'd have to put my address on the contract, because a traditional company is like, well, I don't know what the DAO is. I don't even know where they're based. I don't even know who it is. It's hundreds of people and companies, and what happens? I just need one place to go to send my invoice to. So now this Polkadot Community Foundation provides that one address, that provides that tax number, provides day-to-day personal interface with people outside in the traditional world. Also, it provides some protection to token holders. So if something goes wrong and someone wants to sue us, for instance, instead of just focusing on those individuals within that community who voted on something illegal that money was sent to, they instead lump every token holder together in the same category and say you're all liable for what's happened that was bad. The Polkadot Community Foundation provides some protection for token holders because, of course, that would be the entity that any third party would go to in the event something did go wrong. Of course, you wouldn't want to bankrupt that entity. You need to protect that Polkadot Community Foundation, but it is a line of defense. And it is also an entity who will make sure that individuals within Polkadot who are behaving in a way maybe that we don't want to see, whether it's against certain guiding principles that we put in place or, again, criminal activity, it's a way to hold them accountable as well. If you want to drive adoption, if you want more people to be involved in our Polkadot community, you have to put in place some traditional concepts so they feel comfortable. And that is as simple as being able to post a letter to a physical address that you know somebody is going to pick up, open and read, and look at your invoice and make sure that it's paid. One of the areas where I've been able to help educate founders is through the Polkadot Blockchain Academy and running a course where we talk about a healthy, legal, and compliance diet, much like you have your 5 food groups that go into a healthy eating plan as humans. The same thing would be true about founders. They're building different things. There's different use cases for their products. There's different jurisdictions that they want to be in. They have different approach to how much staffing they need, for instance, or do they want to create a DAO or not? So there are a lot of questions that you need to ask in order to build your healthy legal and compliance plan. But there are 5 main categories. The acronym I have is SRSID. So it's structural, regulatory, staffing, intellectual property, and data. So what is my project? How many people are going to be involved? Are you going to issue a token or not? DeFi versus real world assets versus NFTs versus ethical commodities. There's all different requirements that may attach depending upon what you want to put in place. So getting the right structures put in place very early so you have a solid foundation and you can get as much certainty for your budget and business plan as possible, I think are absolutely key. And building that plan out from the very beginning, being thoughtful, is essential to your longevity. I enjoy trying to get that balance right of providing guidance in an uncertain world about a topic that's so near and dear to so many people's hearts, and then trying to explain it to, frankly, a whole group of people who it intimidates. And maybe I'm a plain talking Southerner, and I have the good fortune of being able to, I hope, simplify topics so it translates between the two worlds. And I enjoy that. I enjoy being able to explain really difficult concepts to people so they can see how it can positively impact their lives. And I also, with a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old, this digital economy is their future. For almost 2 years, the way they had the most interaction with their friendship groups was through Roblox. Because they could go outside for a lot of 2020 and 2021 and they weren't in school. So they're very comfortable with the digital identity. They're very comfortable with the idea of the digital exchange of value with avatars, with gaming, almost to the point where they don't even realize it. And so I feel like, particularly from a legal and regulatory point of view, when I see boomers and Gen Xers in particular who are putting up roadblocks, I think that stifle innovation. I feel like that is ultimately detrimental to my girls and their future. And so whatever I can do to ease that path for the innovation and also for something that I think is just a foregone conclusion, I want to do, because I think it's building a better world, which probably sounds really idealistic, but I am, and I am mission driven, and I'm really happy to be part of a community where people are careful, who do worry about transparency, who are thinking about building this future in a really uncertain world. We see all the changes that are happening, all the conflict that's happening, and I feel responsible not just for my children, but for others to help put in place something that's sustainable. Do you know what I really inspired me was ethical commodities. So the idea that you could essentially on your phone have the equivalent of an ingredients label that could tell you how much CO2 went into building this product, where did the metal come from, who was involved in actually putting together the materials, where was it shipped from, so how much petrol was used to get this to the destination where you're buying it. Like working with people who had a vision of putting that on to different products, whether it's a phone or a car or, something else, plastic that you use day to day. And consumers being able to make their decisions based upon that ethical commodity and ingredient list. I think that vision was really inspiring to me because it just hits a number of important points personally for me. Now that is still coming to life. It is still something that I think people are working towards, but to even be around people who thought that way, I thought was, this is where I want to be, and this is a really good thing to support. A lot of what we have had the privilege to experience is stable political systems where the change of government it happens peacefully. And also stable currencies where, say following a change of government, suddenly your dollar bills, for instance, or your pounds don't become worthless because it's a new party in power. And then suddenly you're using your money to stuff your mattresses and paper your walls rather than actually, buying things with it. But a lot of the world experiences that hyperinflation, experiences that political instability. They're not able to get bank accounts. And that really is by accident of birth. And digital assets and the digital economy that we're creating will give those individuals more options and more security. And that has to be a good thing.